glutamine depletion. So I call that the sacrifice of cysteine for the salvation of glutamine. When cysteine depletion leads to glutamine depletion, this results in leaky gut bacterial translocation that promotes additional infection and inflammation, and it releases pro-inflammatory TLR4 signaling, and that leads to excess or exaggerated inflammation and also other immune impairments. Loss of cysteine and glutathione leads to more viral replication, so that increases the viral load, and loss of cysteine and glutathione leads to more viral mutation, and that leads to increased immune escape and the continuation of these viral infections. So for the review of the clinical studies, I had originally designed the header to look like this, so that each header, and therefore each page, would provide a summary of the most important antiviral mechanisms of NAC or acetylcysteine. However, as I started to develop those pages, I could see that the headline or the header here was actually taking up too much space. So you'll have to keep these ideas in mind as we go through some of the clinical studies that I'm going to review on the next few pages. So when we think of NAC and its antiviral mechanisms, actions, and benefits, you want to think of it being anti-inflammatory, immunopotentiating or supporting immune function, because like I said before, I want you to think of cysteine as being a requirement, almost like a fuel for the immune system. It's also directly antiviral by inhibiting the NF-kappa B pathway, which I already showed you. It provides other benefits, not simply antioxidant, but also antipyretic or lowering fever, and also anti-catabolic or anti-cahexic, which means it helps to block the muscle wasting effect of severe illness, whether that's viral infections or cancer. And among its many benefits, which are clinical and biochemical, one of its main benefits is that it helps to spare glutamine, and that helps to protect muscle mass and also the gut, and also to preserve, by another route, immune function. So think about those benefits as we go through this information, and that may help me to be more efficient as we look at the details of these clinical studies focusing on the benefits of NAC. So let's dive right into that. So the first article that we're going to look at is this one, sodium selenite and NAC in antiretroviral naive HIV patients. So I'm not showing you articles that are all good. In fact, this article was rather lackluster, but I am going to show you how we can look at that information and appreciate its clinical utility, even when the studies may have provided neutral or very rarely negative results. So again, let's take a look at this one from 1998, European Journal of Clinical Investigation. Basically, what I want to focus in on is the fact that this study was rather lackluster in its results, and we have a good reason for that. And it's what I alluded to earlier, and that is, if we use the right treatment in the right patient in the right circumstance, but we use the wrong dose, we're not going to see major clinical benefit. And that's what happened here. So they used sodium selenite and NAC in these HIV positive patients. They used NAC 600 milligrams 3 times per day and sodium selenite, which is a somewhat questionable form of selenium, at 500 micrograms. And that's a pretty potent dose. 500 micrograms is a dose that I would use. I wouldn't necessarily use sodium selenite these days. I would use a different form of selenium. Obviously, selenium-methionine is one of the more popular forms these days. Back in this time, around 1998, sodium selenite actually was popular for a variety of reasons. It has, I believe, fallen out of favor since that time. But let's look at the dose of NAC one more time, 600 milligrams 3 times a day. So that's 1,800 milligrams per day. I'm going to show you as we go through today's information that that dose is completely inadequate, especially for HIV patients. So, like I said, they used the right treatment in the right patients with the right condition, but they used a dose that's completely inadequate. That's about 20% of what they should have used, or maybe 25%. So like I said before, some experts would argue that sodium selenite is certainly not the optimal form here, And clearly, the dose of NAC in this study was inadequate. And one of the ways we know it was inadequate is because they didn't even achieve basic biochemical improvements. So that clearly proves that the dose was not sufficient. So again, I'm going to show you several studies. Not all of them are positive. I didn't filter these. I just picked ones that I thought were representative of the data. And what is truly representative of the data is that several of these studies are lackluster. And the reason they're lackluster is because they used inadequate doses of the treatment intervention. And again, like I've said in some other videos, that's something that you almost never see in the drug studies. You never see a drug study where they used 25% of the effective dose. You never see a drug study where they used 10% of the effective dose. But I see that all the time in the nutrition studies. So the question is, why, on such a consistent basis, are these nutrition studies properly designed, properly selected in terms of patients, the proper treatment is selected, they're using it in the right condition, and then they give 10% or 20% of the appropriate dose? So, for those of you, those of us who believe in this big medical conspiracy against nutrition, that's exactly why we believe in this big conspiracy against nutrition, is because these studies are completely underdosed, and then the headlines read, well, nutritional therapy didn't work. Well, of course it doesn't work if you only use 10 or 20% of the effective dose as a solo intervention. If you're going to use 20% of the dose in a combination intervention, well, maybe then it has some chance because of the nutritional synergy and the biochemical synergy that takes place. But when they use a solo therapy underdosed, then of course the clinical response is going to be underwhelming as well. Let's take a look at another study here. The effect of N-acetyl-cysteine supplementation on viral load, CD4, CD8, total lymphocyte count, and hematocrit in patients with HIV undergoing antiviral treatment. So here they had 10 patients who received 600 milligrams of NAC. So let's just stop there. If you've got 10 patients, which is very small, that's a very small number. If you've got 10 patients who receive NAC at 600 milligrams per day, what do you think the conclusion is going to be? Quite obviously, even if you don't read anything else, you already know that this study was set up to fail. Because for a study with a small number of patients, in this case they only had 10 participants, in order to show statistical significance with only 10 patients, the outcomes, the results would have to be huge. So that's unlikely. And they used only 600 milligrams. Well, I just showed you in the previous study that 1800 milligrams is completely inadequate. So what do you think I'm going to say about 600 milligrams, which is 1/3 of an inadequate dose? It's ridiculous. So basically, this study was a waste of time. They don't have enough patients to show statistical significance, and they used 1/3 of an absurdly low dose. Now the dose is basically homeopathic, and that doesn't work with nutritional therapy. So no surprise there. This is a small study that used inadequately dosed NAC. 600 milligrams per day in HIV/AIDS must be considered completely inadequate, and that's been reflected in the results of other studies as well. What we can say about this study and the study that I showed you previously is that even though the dosage was inadequate for therapeutic benefit, major therapeutic benefit, at least they state that it's safe, inexpensive, and has some positive, in this case, biochemical results. Specifically, what they showed in this study is the stabilization of the hematocrit, which can be a reflection of viral activity and oxidative stress and cytokines, and an increase in the CD4 count, which is actually of clinical significance. So this study wasn't an entire wash, so to speak, or an entire waste of time, but I find no reason whatsoever, no excuse, to be more blunt about it, no excuse for using such an inadequate dose. Let's look at another study here. We're going to see the same thing here. N-acetyl-cysteine therapy in acute viral hepatitis. Let's look at the dose that they used in this study. 200 milligrams, I believe it was 200 milligrams 3 times per day, yes. So 200 milligrams of NAC 3 times per day, that's only 600 milligrams. That's inadequate for an acute infectious disease process. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. They state the drug is not harmful to patients with acute viral hepatitis. So don't have anything else to say about that article. It's just a waste of time, in my opinion. Let me go back and look at it. 200 milligrams 3 times a day for 600 milligrams per day for an acute infectious disease process is inadequate. Let's look at this study.